All right, let's travel back in time. We're going to ancient India, about 2,500 years ago. This was an incredible period, a time of huge spiritual and philosophical change. You had these brilliant minds popping up, and they were questioning everything, asking these really deep, new questions about what life is all about. So let's dive right in.
So at the very heart of this entire movement was this one really powerful question. And it's one we still ask ourselves, right? Why is there so much suffering in the world? And is there anything at all we can do to overcome it? This was the big puzzle, the thing that really obsessed the thinkers of this time.
And look, this wasn't just a handful of scholars sitting around in a quiet room. We're talking about a massive, widespread quest for knowledge that just swept across the entire Indian subcontinent. It was this age of intense intellectual energy, you know? New ideas were just bubbling up all over the place.
So here's the thing. While Siddhartha Gautama, the man who would become the Buddha, was on his famous journey, he was absolutely not alone. All across the land, you had other thinkers who were also pushing back against old traditions and rituals. They were pushing the boundaries of what people thought was possible, really looking for deeper truths about what it all means.
Now, one major group of these thinkers, they're often called the sages of the Upanishads, and they were totally fascinated by this idea of permanence. They looked around and asked, okay, in a world where everything changes, everything decays and dies, is there anything that lasts forever? What's left after we're gone?
And the conclusion they came to? It was pretty radical for the time. They came up with these concepts. Atman, that's the individual soul, the you inside you, and Brahman, which is like the universal soul of, well, everything. And their groundbreaking idea was that these two things, they aren't separate at all. They're actually one and the same. Think about it like this. A single drop of water is still, in its essence, the entire ocean.
Okay, so at the exact same time the Upanishadic sages were teaching all this, two other really remarkable people pop up on the scene, and they're on a very similar quest. What's so fascinating is just how much their stories run in parallel.
The parallels are they're striking. You have Siddhartha Gautama on one hand and Vardhamana Mahavira on the other. Both were born princes, part of the Kshatriya warrior class, and yet both of them chose to give it all up. The palaces, the power, everything, right in the prime of their lives. And why? All to go searching for real, true knowledge.
So if we follow Siddhartha's path, it led him to years of wandering and deep meditation. He finally found what he was looking for, what we call enlightenment, while sitting under a peepal tree in a place called Bodh Gaya. And from that moment on, he became known as the Buddha, which means the awakened one. He then spent the rest of his life teaching, and he gave his very first sermon at Sarnath.
Okay, so we've got these different streams of thought all happening at once, right? You've got the Upanishadic sages, you've got the Buddha, and you've got Mahavira. And remember, they all started with that same huge question about suffering. So what answers did they actually come up with?
Well, the Buddha's answer was incredibly elegant and direct. He taught that the root cause of all our suffering is something called Trishna. And what is that? It's basically this constant thirst, this craving, this desire for things to be different. You know that feeling? We always want more, or we want something else. The path to freedom, he said, was learning how to overcome this craving through self-control.
Mahavira, on the other hand, offered a slightly different, though kind of related, path. For Jains, the most important thing is ahimsa, which means absolute nonviolence. The key insight here is that all living beings, and I mean all, from humans down to the tiniest insect, they all cherish their life and want to live. So you could say, while the Buddha was focused on our internal state of desire, Mahavira really emphasized a strict, absolute rule for how we act. Do no harm to anything.
And this quote from Mahavira just perfectly captures the whole idea. All beings long to live. To all things life is dear. It's such a profound call for empathy, isn't it? It's asking us to see that will to live in every single creature. A really simple idea, but with absolutely radical implications.
So what about those Upanishadic thinkers we talked about? Well, for them, the answer wasn't really about taming your desires or your external actions. It was all about an internal realization. They believed you could overcome suffering by truly deeply understanding that your individual self, your atman, was never actually separate from the universal soul, the Brahman, in the first place.
But here's the thing. These weren't just abstract philosophies for people to debate. No way. They fundamentally changed how people actually lived their lives. These new ideas sparked whole new social structures and created new paths for anyone who was looking for a life with more meaning and purpose.
One of the most important innovations to come out of this was something called the Sangha, So what was it? It was basically an association, a community, for men and women who left their homes to become monks and nuns. It was a place where they could dedicate themselves 100% to meditation and seeking truth, living a very simple life together. And the level of commitment this required, especially for the Jains, was just immense. Life in the Sangha was governed by some really strict vows. You had to be absolutely honest. You could never steal. You had to observe celibacy. And for the men who became monks, it meant giving up literally everything, right down to their clothes. It was a powerful symbol of complete detachment from the material world.
Now, at the same time, the Brahmanical tradition was developing its own system for how to structure a life. It was called the ashrama system, and it laid out 4 distinct stages of life, mostly for men in the upper castes. First, you're a student. Then, you become a grihasta, a householder. You get married, have a family. Later on, you could become a vanaprastha, or forest dweller, to focus on meditation. And finally, you could become a sannyasa, giving everything up. It was this really structured way to weave a spiritual quest into a whole lifetime, instead of just renouncing the world when you're young.
So when you step back and look at the big picture, what's the lasting legacy of this incredible period? Well, these weren't just passing fads or thoughts. These ideas would go on to shape entire civilizations.
I mean, think about it. These ancient quests for truth didn't just disappear. The teachings of the Buddha, they evolved into Buddhism, a major world religion. The path laid out by Mahavira, that became Jainism. And those ideas from the Upanishads, they became a cornerstone of Hindu philosophy. These are living, breathing traditions that continue to guide millions and millions of people all over the world today.
And that really leaves us with a final thought, doesn't it? These ideas are 2,500 years old. They were born in a world so incredibly different from ours, and yet they're all about the most fundamental parts of being human: desire, suffering, the search for meaning. So the real question for us today is this: how do these ancient answers still speak to our modern questions?